All right, thank you very much. Welcome to the Fermilab track with HTCondor Week. And you guys are very, very used to this picture by now. Anyway, I'm here today to talk to you guys about transitioning users to SciToken and getting them closer to HTCondor with Jobsub Lite. Those of you who've worked with Fermilab and have heard us talk about Jobsub a lot, you'll appreciate the fact that we want to get closer to HTCondor and not keep building wrappers. So I'll be talking about a background on the Jobsub project, what it is, and the issues we ran into leading up to this work, what Jobsub Lite is, the using tokens in Jobsub Lite and how we use SciTokens there, the general adoption of Jobsub Lite, and talking about just in general transitioning from an old infrastructure to a new infrastructure, the good things and the bad things that we ran across, and the lessons that we've learned so far. All right, so a couple of decades ago, many intensity frontier experiments at Fermilab had their own wrapper scripts that were written on top of HTCondor, and these were very, very, very disparate scripts. And so the FIVE project was conceived, and the Jobsub project within that, to unify these wrappers and the infrastructure, the software stack, to provide a common job submission interface on top of HTCondor, and to, while doing that, provide load balancing, high availability, credential management, job log management, amongst the multiple SCED cluster that we have there. So we first had this Jobsub tools piece of software, and then for the last decade, we've been running a Jobsub client, Jobsub server pairing. And the Jobsub client was generally installed on the experiment submit nodes, and the Jobsub server, along with the HTCondor SCED, was run on a separate machine, and we had 3 of those in our cluster. And the interaction between the two was mediated via REST API. And that led to this lovely infrastructure here, of which we had to worry about all of this stuff as code developers. So the problems that arose from this is that, first of all, we were yes people. Being way too permissive with feature requests meant that it led to a lot of code customization for the different experiments because they all had their way of doing each particular thing. That led to a lot of gotchas and unexpected code behavior. And there were, in fact, too many ways to do what were essentially the same operation. An example is tarball upload. I actually had to present to experiments when we were talking about this, a table of 8 different ways to upload a tarball with slightly different things from each one, which is not good. For what was supposed to be a lightweight unifying piece of software on top of Condor, we had 21,000 lines of code, and that didn't include tests or packaging scripts or anything like that. And just supporting that current feature set became way too difficult for the effort that we had available. And it also complicated building new features and fixing any bugs that arose. So we decided to take advantage of the transition of the OSG organization to SciToken authorization and HTCondor dropping internal proxy authorization to rewrite the whole Jobsub software stack. And that also helped us neatly avoid the issues with proxies that have been discussed ad nauseum here. Namely, you have examples of users that can accidentally, within a batch job, delete large swaths of data. This actually happened to us, and recovering that was not fun. Thankfully, I'm not the one who had to do that. All right, so Jobsub Lite. Jobsub Lite is a new piece of software written in Python for job submission and monitoring, and is built directly on top of HTCondor. We tried to keep the most used pieces of the old Jobsub client and strip out the unnecessary parts so we could really focus our interface. It's client only, that is installed on the experiment submit nodes. And we have our Jobsub counterparts to the Condor commands like Jobsub submit, Jobsub queue. And currently we submit jobs with both proxies and tokens. That's only for this transitional period because we have some experiments that use storage elements that still will not support tokens yet and won't for the next couple of years. But we hope to phase out proxy obtaining eventually. And then we submit our jobs remotely to the SCED, and I'll be talking more about that in a bit because we did run into issues there. So what happens in Jobsub Lite? We take a user command, we find the SCEDs in the cluster that experiment or user can submit to. And then for a submission case, we convert that user command to a Condor JDF and then use Condor submit to submit the job. For other commands, we'll get the correct credentials and convert that user command to the appropriate Condor command, and then just go ahead and run that. So for example, this Jobsub Q command becomes this Condor Q command. Oops, did the laser pointer by accident. The idea here again was to keep Jobsub light. We wanted to keep this very, very lightweight. And so in order to do that, we also provide even lighter, I'm using the word light a lot, Condor executables as well. So we wrap Condor submit and Condor Q as well and provide that to the users. I'll speak more on that next slide, actually. We also provide DAG submission through a Jobsub submit DAG executable. And we do this because we know that given that for the last decade, users have gotten used to using Jobsub in that interface at Fermilab. And we know that most users will probably continue to do so. What we really wanted to do with this rewrite, besides making our lives easier with a more maintainable software stack, was also to push these more advanced use cases that led to unnecessary feature requests to Condor and make users, train users in getting used to using Condor for those cases. And to help with that, we actually have an option in Jobsub Lite or Jobsub Submit, where we actually just generate the Condor JDF, hand it to the user and say, okay, now you can take this, tweak it as you want, and then use Condor Submit to go ahead and submit that. Let me just take a quick aside and talk about the Condor wrappers that we've got. We actually got this idea from Farouk and his work with the CMS LPC. And basically what they are very, very lightweight wrappers on top of Condor Q, Condor Submit, things like that. And all they do is parse a couple of arguments, really just to get the correct credentials, and then hand the rest of the work over to Condor. So this looks very familiar. This Condor Q command, which is our wrapped Condor Q, and the path in a user environment will point to this, becomes the same Condor Q command you saw last slide. All right, quick note on our infrastructure here and what Condor versions we've been using. So during development, because of timing and what Condor was available, we were using Condor 9 on our schedules. And now in production, we're using Condor 10.03. We currently are deploying with shared schedules. That is, these access points are available to be used by multiple experiments. We do plan on transitioning to a hybrid model whereby some experiments will have their own access point and other experiments, other of these access point schedules will be shared amongst multiple experiments. Our submit nodes are mostly running 9.0.17 right now, and it's nice to note that Condor 9, Condor 10 mix there isn't actually a mismatch. They work well together, but we are planning to upgrade them to 10 soon. We just haven't gotten around to that yet. And so this is what the new infrastructure looks like. And what I want to draw your attention to here, from an operational standpoint, is that we as developers really only have to worry about this little part right here. The rest of it is now Condor and other utilities. We also do have, we also here have Condor Submit, our Condor Q, and then there's also Condor Vault Store there that also mediates the credential management. So with that, let's actually talk about tokens and our authentication and authorization. So this is how we do this for the 5 experiments at Fermilab. We use HTGetToken by Dave back there to obtain Vault and Bearer tokens. And the steps we do are that we very simply use the user's Kerberos ticket to authenticate to a HashiCorp Vault server. And the Vault contacts the token issuer. Let me actually go over here. If I can point this way. Contacts our token issuer, which is CI logon. And then that will, the first time, prompt the user to authenticate. And after that, once that's done, the Vault token and access token gets sent to the user node, and the refresh token gets stored in our Vault. All right, so what has this gotten us so far? First of all, we have fine-grained access control with SciTokens, which is really nice because no more of that worry before about wiping out tons and tons and tons of data unless you really, really try. Right? So, for example, Dune has our flagship experiment at Fermilab has many, many different capability sets for their tokens. And for those of you who don't know what a capability set is just a set of predefined token scopes that mediate what you can actually do and what resources you can access. And the nice thing is that with this new system and with these new capability sets and this control, we can actually outsource the decisions on what different capability sets should be able to do, different roles. We can outsource that decision to the experiments themselves. We actually have a ServiceNow workflow, because that's our ticketing system, where experiments can actually request changes to these sets themselves, and then they get updated via LDAP. The Jobsub commands then will obtain the access token via HTGetToken in case it's needed. And we also leverage Condor to do a token exchange at submission time. So this is yet another guardrail that we're able to build in. Little bit of token nitty gritty here. So for those of you who don't know, there are two scopes, and I'm going to give as examples here: storage.read and storage.create. And what that means is that for a particular storage element, if you're looking at a particular path, you can read from that path, hence read, and you can create files of that path. And in Jobsub Lite, our default mode and our default tokens that we give the user is a token with just those two, along with the various other compute scopes and things like that. We do not, by default, give them storage.modify. That scope allows users to rename and delete files at a particular path. And users have to specifically request tokens that have that scope in order to get them. And this is one way that we put guardrails around job submission and make sure that you don't have a job that accidentally wipes out tons and tons of data, for example. And this is all made possible via Condor's token exchange mechanism, which has been really, really handy for us. All right, so a little aside here. Previously, we had a service that we ran at Fermilab with S509 proxies that was called the Managed Proxy Service. And the reason that this came about was because users, actually experiments, requested that they have a credential on their submit nodes ready to go all the time that would get refreshed. And so they requested that when we transitioned to tokens, they would not be able to live if we did not provide the same thing with tokens. So we did. HTGetToken actually supports the use of robot Kerberos credentials to obtain vault tokens. And we leverage this capability to create a new service, the Managed Token Service, very creative name, of course, that just does these three things. We obtain the correct Kerberos credentials. We run Condor Vault Store for each SCED in our cluster that is applicable to that experiment. And then we rsync the vault token over to the appropriate submit nodes. And because, again, these tokens are much, much more focused in on what they're allowed to do, this is a much safer way than the previous managed proxy. This is a much more secure thing than the previous managed proxy service. From the user side, this looks really nice because all they have to do is they don't even have to authenticate, because when we onboard them, we'll actually do that initial step with the token issuer ourselves. And the push vault token that's now sitting on their submit node is used then to get a shorter lived bearer token. So from the user's point of view, they just simply set the cred key in the environment, which tells HTGetToken where the refresh token is in the vault. And in the Jobsub command, they simply pass a flag saying, this is my capability set. And this has been running in production since last November with very, very few issues, I'm happy to say. All right, let's talk about what we've learned now. So this is a graph that shows the number of jobs that were submitted per week since the beginning of the year, using, in the top left, Jobsub client, the old system, and on the right, Jobsub Lite. And so there are a few lessons we can learn from this. So I want to spend a minute here. First of all, here was GA at the end of January, beginning of February. What we can see is that when we went live, there's a bit of an uptick, but not a huge ramp up that we're hoping for. In fact, even when we made Jobsub Lite the default way of submitting jobs as opposed to Jobsub client, we did not see a huge uptick. That didn't start until March. And the reason why that didn't start there is because that's when we started working one-on-one, one-on-two with the experiments, really, really helping them transition their workflows from one system to the next, working through their worries about tokens and things like that. And so that was a very important lesson for us to learn, is that even if we think we did everything right, you still have to sell this to your user base. And just to bookend that, we actually disabled Jobsub client at close to the end of May. So submissions were not possible anymore using the old system, just job management. So your Jobsub queue, Jobsub RM, that sort of thing. And then as of about 2 weeks ago, we are now running all Jobsub Lite for the 5 experiments. All right, so good news and bad news. The good news is that users now have full access to the Condor commands and their Condor JDS. So no passing through constraints through Jobsub, which involve lots and lots of backslashes and trying to figure out how to escape this character here and that sort of thing like that. We don't have to do that anymore because you have the JDFs that you can work with and just edit those. You also don't have to wrap Condor DAG commands if you don't want to. And with our more focused interface, we were able to get more users onto Jobsub Lite quicker. Horizontal scaling has also been much easier because we now don't have to worry about a web server that's sitting in front and worry about the round robin DNS when adding a schedule or taking one out or anything like that. It's just add a schedule to the cluster and go for it. So yeah, we started with 1 sched D in production, and we've now scaled to 4, and we can do rolling upgrades because we can set certain sched Ds in downtime, do the upgrade, and then bring them back up. It's very clean like that. For everyone, now including us, is that, again, we have fine-grained control via SciTokens. There's a lot less code than before, and that means that it's easier to fix bugs and add the small amount of features that we want to at this point. But we've had to be very strict about those feature requests because obviously being strict about those feature requests means that it decreases our support load. And again, it helps us drive home our message that if you really want to do this, go use Condor because it's already got the knobs you need to do what you need to do. So now let's talk about the bad news. We did run into a bunch of infrastructure issues in sort of that January to March timeframe of this year. And so here are a couple of examples of those. First of all, if the cred had issues talking to the vault, there was oftentimes not enough info in the logs to actually take action. You would see something like token expired, but then nothing about why that actually happened. So this is the example that I've got here. If the token expired in the credmon in certain cases, again, remember, we're running multiple sched Ds, jobs would just fail to start and the users wouldn't be notified and we wouldn't be notified until the jobs weren't held because the shadow kept trying to get started over and over and over again, hundreds, thousands of times. And thankfully that was fixed in 10.03. So thank you, Condor team. These kind of issues led to led to duty cycle issues on our sched Ds. For example, the above token issue. And because we don't have a Jobsub server in front, we kind of had forgotten that we do have to throttle job submissions a little bit. But thankfully, tweaking these couple of knobs helped us get things under control, shall we say. And again, I just wanted to say thank you to the Condor team for really, really helping us fix these and assisting with helping on these issues. So now let's talk about the bad news when it comes to a policy standpoint and a deployment standpoint. One big thing that we did wrong was we didn't have our monitoring fully set up before we went live with Jobsub Lite. It came about a month later. And the problem was, people had gotten very used to FifeMon and how robust it was. And many of you have seen Kevin's previous talks, Kevin Retzky's talks at Condor Week before. They'd gotten used to that, and we didn't have it ready for the transition in time. And we made the decision, you know what, let's just go live. People will be okay with it. And they weren't. And that led to a lot of resistance to adoption. Also, because we were doing remote submission with the spool option, the jobs didn't by default leave the queue because we didn't have those knobs set. And so FifeMon, which relied on that, on jobs leaving the queue, because we read from Condor history for that, didn't have proper monitoring in place. That got fixed and people are now happy, but there was definitely a lot of pain points in that February to March timeframe. There was a general resistance to adopting tokens because, as Bruno and Namrata have talked about, why change things when they work? And users definitely gave us that story as well. X509 proxies work. I can do whatever I want to. Why should I move to tokens? And we, of course, the way we got around that was we had to, of course, work with users, work with the power users, especially in the experiments, to really get them across that line. And we've had to be strict about feature requests, which, of course, leads to uncomfortable conversations when you're trying to tell someone no. All right, so to sum up then here, what are the lessons that we learned? First of all, inertia is real, right? Getting people to move from an old system to a new system is very, very difficult if there's no real impetus for them to go that way. But And in that same line, it's better to delay a go live of this magnitude if you don't have all your support systems ready to go at go live time. In fact, the robust monitoring of our old system allowed us to choose which features we wanted to implement in Jobsub Lite. And running both systems in parallel was really helpful during that transition time because people could fall back to the old Jobsub client with just a flag switch, which was really nice. And that was assisted by the class add mechanism that you can deploy on SCEDs, where we can choose which submit nodes could submit to which SCEDs. And lastly, tokens are not the same as proxies. For those of you who are making that transition or plan to make that transition, training users is key to getting this right. With the large disparate amount of environments that we have, or disparate environments that we have within our various experiments, you really want to get as many stakeholders from different experiments or different groups to test as early as possible, not just the ones who are willing to do that. And then just a little aside here, you only have one test SCED, don't have them all tested once because that brought that down. And, you know, because we're like, yeah, test, and they all did and it went down. But the last point that I have about this is that those who were willing to test early did profit. The ones who tested very early had very, very few issues after go live. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much. I'll skip this slide now because I know I'm running out of time, but the work is still in progress. And we're hoping that we can eventually get to that holy grail of maintenance mode sooner rather than later. So thanks very much. I'll refer you to these and take questions now.